Winter is the season most people slow down, disconnect from discipline, and let their habits decay. The cold gives them permission to retreat into comfort. The dark evenings give them an excuse to delay their goals. They say they will begin again in January, and then repeat the same cycle they promised to escape last year. This pattern is predictable. It is also avoidable. Winter can become the strongest season of your life if you choose to treat it as a training ground instead of a pause button. A winter arc is about returning to structure, clarity, and intention. It is about using the stillness of the season to become sharper, calmer, stronger, and more effective. There is less noise. There are fewer distractions. The world moves slower, and that creates an advantage for the person who is willing to move deliberately while everyone else drifts. When you treat winter as your peak development phase, spring becomes the reveal instead of the starting point. This is the ultimate winter arc, a master plan for self-improvement that is built for adults who want lasting change, not seasonal enthusiasm. It is designed for people who understand that transformation comes from consistency, not inspiration. The winter arc becomes a private contract with yourself, a promise that the next few months will become the foundation for everything you build next year. Before we walk through the system, you need to understand one critical idea. Winter rewards the prepared. When the temperature drops and sunlight disappears early, discipline becomes easier to see. You either drift or direct yourself. You either strengthen your internal authority or you hand it away. This season exposes habits with accuracy. It shows who is rooted in intention and who is ruled by impulse. This master plan is a lecture built for those who want to raise their standard of living from the inside out. No motivational slogans, no dramatic personal anecdotes. Only a clear structure designed to help you upgrade your mind, your body, your habits, your skills, and your future direction. The first shift begins with reclaiming your mornings. The winter arc is anchored in rhythm. A consistent wake time stabilizes energy, focus, and self-trust. The mind performs better under stable conditions. Chaos in the morning creates chaos all day. This is why the morning becomes your command center. When you wake at the same time each day, you create psychological proof that you are in control of your life. Journaling for a few minutes gives your mind an anchor. It gives direction to the day before anything external can interfere. Physical movement is the second anchor. The body influences the mind. A static body encourages a static mood. Movement creates alertness, resilience, circulation, and energy. Winter pushes people towards stillness. The Stoic counter is momentum. Light movement in the morning signals the brain that the day has begun with purpose. Stretching, brisk walking, or calisthenics are enough to activate this mechanism. The environment is the third anchor. A cluttered space produces scattered thinking. A clean environment supports decisiveness. Stoic practice begins with governing what is within your authority. Your home is within your authority. Your workspace is within your authority. The winter arc strengthens internal order by first creating external order. When your space is clean, your behavior follows cleaner lines of execution. Discipline develops through repetition, not intensity. A winter arc trains the nervous system to follow through on commitments. Each completed action reinforces identity. Each avoided distraction reinforces clarity. The goal is not to chase a dramatic breakthrough. The goal is to develop a stable rhythm that feels non-negotiable. Build on this foundation with physical strength, mental conditioning, emotional control, skill growth, and long-range direction. Use this plan as the blueprint for a stronger identity built through deliberate winter training. Physical strength is the base layer of personal power during winter. The body adapts to what it experiences daily. When the environment becomes harsher, Deliberately training the body develops resilience. Strength training, long walks in the cold, controlled exposure to discomfort, and consistent nutritional discipline create a stable internal state. When the body is strong, decision fatigue lowers and clarity rises. Winter training is not about appearance. It is about command over impulses and instinct. Mental conditioning becomes the second layer. The mind follows repeated cues. If it is constantly flooded with digital stimulation, it becomes reactive. If it receives structured input through reading, reflection, and controlled silence, it becomes sharp. Meditation is mental strength training. It teaches the mind to return to the present. Breathwork improves emotional regulation. Stoic reading gives structure to thinking. Reflection through writing gives storage and awareness of patterns. Emotional control is the third major layer. Adults in their 30s, 40s, and 50s often face a quiet erosion of inner authority through stress, fatigue, and digital overstimulation. Emotional reactivity drains energy. A Stoic winter arc teaches regulated responses. Instead of seeking comfort, you redirect energy toward constructive routines. Each time you choose discipline instead of emotional impulse, self-respect compounds. Skill growth is the fourth layer. A winter arc is a creation season. While others slow down, you advance. Select a skill that has a high return on invested effort. Study in a structured way, then apply through projects and repetition. Rehearsal builds competence. Competence builds internal proof that your effort produces results. Skill development creates future leverage. Long-range direction becomes the fifth layer. Winter is planning season. The world moves slower. Your thinking becomes clearer when the schedule tightens and distractions fade. This is where you architect your next chapter. The Stoics practiced foresight. They trained their minds to see consequences and prepare. During winter, planning becomes strategy instead of fantasy. You define targets and behaviors that support the identity you are building. This winter arc is not a checklist. It is a complete restructuring of how you live through the season. The cold becomes conditioning. The dark evenings become training windows. The stillness becomes focus. Instead of waiting for the new year, you enter it already sharpened. Winter exposes what was neglected during the warmer months. It reveals the gap between intention and discipline. That gap is where identity is either strengthened or weakened. The person who embraces a winter arc uses the cold as a mirror. The season becomes a teacher. The nervous system learns to withstand stress. The mind learns to operate without constant comfort. The spirit learns to move with purpose instead of drift. Each morning becomes a test of alignment. You train yourself to rise when you said you would rise. There is no bargaining with the alarm. There is no negotiation with fatigue. You wake, you breathe, you move, and you take command of the day before the world places demands on you. This creates psychological ownership. A consistent morning is sovereign territory. Throughout winter, the body becomes an engine of reliability. Physical strength is not treated as vanity. It is treated as self-governance. A strong body carries stress with steadiness. A trained body reinforces discipline without internal argument. Strength training 3 to 5 times per week and walking in cold air develops endurance of both muscle and mind. You train the will each time you start when you do not feel like starting. Nutrition becomes a form of self-respect. High-quality fuel stabilizes mood, cognition, and recovery. Heavy comfort food dulls energy and motivation. A winter arc favors clean inputs. Hydration, protein, and whole foods become the baseline. When the body is well supplied, the mind performs with clarity. The cold becomes optional hardship. Exposure to discomfort teaches the nervous system that stress does not equal threat. A cold shower or a winter walk builds tolerance for intensity. The moment you embrace the cold, you reclaim control from instinct. You shift from avoidance to command. Spiritual resilience grows when the body no longer fears discomfort. Mental conditioning builds your internal architecture. Silence is training. Reading philosophy is training. Reflection is training. Your focus becomes stable when the mind is no longer dragged by scattered input. Most people fill every quiet moment with noise. The winter arc reverses this. You treat silence as preparation, not emptiness. A Stoic winter arc cultivates emotional steadiness. External conditions lose their influence because the nervous system is prepared. The more predictable your internal world becomes, the less reactive you become to the external one. Emotional control is not suppression, it is precision. You respond based on principle instead of impulse. Skill development converts winter into strategic progress. The person who learns during winter outpaces the person who waits for motivation. You build momentum through practice and application. One skill pursued with consistency carries more impact than shallow attempts at many. Winter rewards single focus. Planning becomes a ritual of clarity. You review your month with honesty. You identify behaviors that serve your goals and behaviors that sabotage them. You create structure for your future actions. Stoic foresight means training the mind to see what you are building rather than what you are wishing for. Every day inside the winter arc follows a rhythm. Morning discipline, physical training, focused skill work, controlled input, emotional steadiness, strategic reflection. This repetition forms identity. You become the type of person whose actions are aligned with intention. Confidence grows because self-trust grows. This is how the winter arc reshapes a person. It is not a temporary challenge. It is a recalibration of how you live during the most advantageous season for growth. The world slows down, so you accelerate from within. The cold strips away comfort, so you build strength. The darkness lengthens the night, so you build deeper focus. A relentless winter arc requires a standard that does not bend when comfort tempts you. The season becomes a test of seriousness. You are either training or decaying. There is no neutral state. Each day you enforce structure. Each day you reinforce the identity you are building. Consistency becomes a duty, not a preference. This level of discipline demands removal of friction. You simplify your decisions. You predetermine your wake time, your workout window, your reading block, your skill block, and your wind-down period. You decide once and execute daily. When your schedule is automatic, willpower is protected. The fewer decisions your mind needs to negotiate, the more energy you preserve for growth. The winter arc treats time as a controlled resource. You stop leaking attention. Phone use is limited to intentional windows. You set boundaries on consumption. You create more than you consume. Entertainment becomes a reward earned after completion, not a substitute for effort. You detach from passive scrolling and replace it with practice, training, reflection, and strategy. You hold yourself to a physical standard because the body influences everything. Strong posture signals internal command. Strength training teaches follow-through. Cold exposure strengthens the relationship between intention and execution. When you choose controlled hardship each day, you stop fearing stress. Energy becomes directed instead of scattered. Winter is the perfect season to sharpen identity. You decide what you will become by spring, and you act as that person daily. You train before you feel ready. You move before comfort argues. You read before distraction enters. You plan before doubt appears. This is how a disciplined foundation is built. A relentless winter arc also requires solitude. Isolation becomes productive silence. You do not withdraw from life. You withdraw from noise. You use quiet to sharpen judgment. You use stillness to regulate your state. When external stimulation drops, internal clarity rises. You experience your real thoughts without digital interference, and you gain authority over them. Self-respect climbs when you see your own consistency. You become someone you can rely on. The mind stops searching for escape because it learns it can endure. This is where real confidence begins. It is not manufactured by affirmation. It is built through repeated proof of discipline. A full-spectrum winter arc goes beyond lifestyle adjustment. It reshapes internal architecture. External actions create internal evidence. Internal evidence creates new identity. When identity shifts, discipline stops feeling like effort and becomes expression. You are not forcing yourself to behave a certain way. You are becoming someone for whom those behaviors are baseline. This is why winter is the most strategic season for transformation. Short days create long evenings. Long evenings create extended training windows. The world goes quiet, so there is no competition for your attention. Most people waste these conditions through passivity. A Stoic winter arc converts them into advantage. While others slow down, you compound. The first major transformation inside a full-spectrum winter arc is energy reclamation. You remove low-value inputs. You break stimulation loops. You reclaim dopamine from digital consumption and redirect it into skill, strength, and focus. Energy previously wasted through distraction becomes fuel for mastery. The second major transformation is identity recalibration. You decide who you will become in spring, then you train as that person daily. You do not wait until you feel ready. You create readiness through action. The Stoics understood that character is built through repetition of principle-aligned behavior. Winter becomes a forge for that repetition. The third transformation is mental sovereignty. You stop reacting to mood, temptation, weather, and circumstance. You train the mind to obey command. When you choose the hard task instead of default comfort, you rewire your threshold for stress. You become stable under intensity. You gain internal authority. The fourth transformation is physical reinforcement. A disciplined body supports a disciplined mind. Training sharpens posture, breathing, circulation, and resilience. It also resets your relationship with strain. When the body can carry stress, the mind stops panicking under pressure. Winter becomes a strength multiplier. The fifth transformation is long-range direction. You shift from drifting to architecting. You move from reacting to structuring. You build a strategy for the year ahead with precision instead of vague intention. The Stoics lived through deliberation and preparation. A winter arc revives that standard. These 5 transformations create compound identity shift. They stack. They reinforce each other. You are no longer living by mood. You are living by choice. You are no longer waiting for improvement. You are engineering it. From this point forward, winter is not a season you endure. It is a season you dominate. It becomes the proving ground for everything you expect from yourself. The world slows down. You accelerate. The environment hardens. You harden with it. A controlled steel tone means discipline delivered without theatrics. The message is direct, grounded, and unwavering. The winter arc becomes instruction, not inspiration. Execution is treated as a duty carried out with precision. You move because it is required, not because you feel charged by emotion. This is the language of internal command. Environmental control follows. Your daily surroundings either reinforce discipline or weaken it. You remove clutter because clutter drains focus. You prepare your training space the night before, so momentum is already in motion when the morning begins. You lay out your clothing. You simplify preparation. You make it easier to complete the right actions than to retreat into comfort. This is strategic discipline. You also begin eliminating invisible losses. These are the small daily leaks of time, energy, and mental strength that sabotage consistency. You track where your attention goes during unguarded moments. You cut digital grazing. You set strict windows for phone usage. You protect your mornings as a no-consumption zone. The first inputs of the day program your mental direction. You start with creation, not consumption. Routine becomes scaffolding for identity. A precise morning practice builds psychological proof that you are someone who follows through. Your evening practice closes the day with structure. You do not drift into sleep. You land the day with reflection and reset. This stabilizes the nervous system and sharpens intention for the next morning. Your schedule becomes built around pillars instead of scattered tasks. Morning discipline, physical training, skill development, deep work, strategic silence, recovery. Each pillar supports transformation. You repeat them until they become baseline behavior. Once a pillar becomes automatic, effort drops and growth accelerates. This is how winter becomes a multiplier. You are no longer improvising your life. You are engineering your foundation. Every day becomes a brick. Every consistent action becomes reinforcement. Motivation is irrelevant because systems remove the need for emotional permission. When behavioral consistency becomes the engine, transformation is driven by repetition that reshapes identity through proof. You stop relying on feelings as a compass. You rely on execution windows. The person who follows a system becomes stronger than the person who waits for motivation. Consistency is not intensity. Consistency is structure sustained long enough for identity to reorganize around it. Build the discipline loop. Every day follows a fixed sequence: wake, anchor, move, build, reflect. The first actions of the day determine whether you operate with intention or drift. You do not delay movement. You do not reach for distraction. You begin with command. This protects the mind from starting in reaction. A consistent rhythm rewires self-perception. You stop seeing yourself as someone who hopes to improve and begin seeing yourself as someone who executes. Internal dialogue shifts from negotiation to certainty. The mind stops searching for shortcuts because it has evidence that disciplined repetition is sustainable. Behavioral consistency also simplifies life. When the day is structured, there is no confusion about where energy belongs. Your code of behavior becomes predictable. You protect effort from clutter. The nervous system relaxes because it trusts the plan. This stability creates cognitive clarity, which improves decision quality. Winter becomes a container for this repetition. The season offers isolation, silence, and fewer external demands. Where others experience boredom, you experience structure. Where others retreat, you fortify. A consistent daily pattern becomes ascetic training for modern life. It forces you to commit in conditions that do not reward comfort. This approach sharpens identity. You become someone who completes the standard you set. That reliability builds internal power. When you act from consistency, you no longer fear challenge. You already know you will follow through because you have lived it repeatedly. The winter arc transitions from preparation into execution protocol. Build a daily operational template that governs your time, attention, and internal state. This is where theory becomes command. A precision protocol establishes discipline at the level of execution, not idea. The winter arc now shifts from philosophy into operational command. You are designing a day that does not allow drift. The system removes negotiation by predetermining the order of action. This turns discipline into default behavior. The protocol begins the night before. You set the conditions for tomorrow. You stage your environment for the version of yourself you intend to be at sunrise. Clothing ready, training equipment ready, journal ready, reading material ready, water ready. The path is cleared. The decision is already made. When morning arrives, execution begins without friction. The wake sequence is the first pillar. You rise when the alarm sounds. You do not check notifications. You stand, hydrate, breathe, and move. A short burst of physical activation signals the nervous system to shift from passive state to engaged state. This primes focus and reduces morning lethargy. The anchor sequence is next. You journal for a few minutes to define direction. Gratitude calibrates perspective. Priorities determine focus. This brief writing window replaces passive morning scrolling with strategic mental alignment. You are giving orders to the mind instead of receiving noise from the outside world. The movement block enforces physical command early in the day. It is not your primary workout. It is a physiological activation window. Stretching, brisk walking, body weight drills, or breath work. The intent is to rehearse discipline before fatigue or distraction can invade. The mind strengthens through immediate proof of action. The first deep work block is reserved for high-value skill building. Phone off. No passive consumption. This is where your future competence is built. 1 to 2 hours of structured practice, repetition, application, production. By protecting this window, you build consistency in the domain that moves your life forward. A winter arc also involves friction elimination during the afternoon. This is where most people lose discipline. The system prevents drift by inserting a reset ritual. You pause, breathe, and realign before transitioning into your physical training window. This prevents loss of momentum. The main training block anchors the body. Strength or conditioning. Cold weather walking when possible. Your body learns obedience. Your mind learns resilience through exertion. The physical system reinforces the behavioral system. The evening sequence prepares your next day. You clean your space. You reflect briefly on execution. You identify where you upheld your standard and where you compromised. This maintains accountability without emotion. You reset the environment, so tomorrow begins without resistance. This is how a winter arc becomes structural transformation. You do not hope to grow. You engineer growth through precise repetition. The system is the discipline. With the Stoic instructor as the governing internal voice, discipline becomes guided authority. The inner dialogue is a mentor in command, not a critic and not a tyrant. Instruction replaces impulse. Direction replaces doubt. The voice reminds you of your standard and redirects you toward alignment without emotional volatility. You hold yourself accountable through principle, not punishment. Psychological consolidation begins. You convert repetition into identity. Every time you execute without negotiation, you strengthen internal credibility. You prove to yourself that you follow through. This is how self-trust is constructed. It is not a feeling. It is evidence repeated until it becomes character. The Stoic instructor voice issues clear commands. Wake now, move now, train now, focus now. It does not argue with mood. It does not submit to comfort. It does not wait for energy. It issues instruction based on standard. You act because the action is aligned with who you are becoming. This method strips internal chaos. You are no longer responding to whatever stimulus arrives. You are directing your behavior through a plan that has already been chosen by your higher judgment. This eliminates hesitation. You move from decision to execution with minimal delay. Delay drains discipline. Velocity protects it. A full winter arc also introduces strategic austerity. You remove excess stimulation so your nervous system can reset. Silence sharpens awareness. Fewer inputs improve clarity. Limited entertainment increases focus. A reduction in indulgence restores your capacity for self-restraint. You are training command over appetite, not through deprivation, but through structure. The self becomes orderly through routine. Thought becomes orderly through reflection. Environment becomes orderly through preparation. Action becomes orderly through consistency. When each of these domains aligns, identity stabilizes. You are no longer trying to improve. You are living improvement daily. At this stage, resistance becomes predictable. The mind will attempt to return to familiar comfort when fatigue rises or when progress becomes invisible. The Stoic instructor voice anticipates this. It does not negotiate. It issues redirection. Continue. Stay with the plan. Complete the sequence. You do not collapse into preference. You follow the order. This is how the nervous system learns resilience. You train it to carry discipline through friction. You build capacity for discomfort without emotional escalation. Stress becomes workload, not threat. Challenge becomes proof, not discouragement. The system begins to feel natural. The identity behind it begins to feel solid. The winter arc enters the strengthening phase. You have built the foundation. Reinforce repetition into permanence. Discipline evolves into internal authority. A ruthless standard means there is no allowance for partial effort or selective discipline. The winter arc becomes a contract without loopholes. You execute the protocol even when conditions are imperfect. You follow the schedule even when mood resists. You remain aligned with your structure even when no one is there to witness the execution. This is the threshold where identity hardens. Ruthless discipline does not require aggression. It requires refusal to break the standard. You do not wait for a better day. You do not scale back because comfort asks for relief. You complete what you committed to because the completion is evidence that you live by command, not by impulse. The Stoic path is consistency that does not bend based on internal weather. At this stage of the winter arc, your daily life shifts into enforcement mode. You do not negotiate with delay. You remove the luxury of postponement. If a task belongs in the day, it is completed within the day. This prevents the mind from softening through excuses. A ruthless standard protects your momentum. Discipline is maintained through repetition of obedience to your own directive. Each time you follow through, you reinforce neural proof that you are someone who carries out decisions rather than circling them. This repetition removes hesitation. It creates immediacy. Immediate execution is how discipline matures into instinct. This strict standard also creates internal quiet. Most psychological turmoil exists in the gap between what you know you should do and what you actually do. When that gap disappears, self-conflict decreases. Mental clarity increases because there is no argument with yourself. You live in alignment instead of tension. The will strengthens when there is no escape route. When you cannot delay, you develop capacity. When comfort is not an option, discipline stabilizes. A ruthless standard eliminates drift. Drift is replaced by directed action that repeats until it becomes identity. Stoic accountability means you correct without collapse. A mistake is addressed, not indulged. You return to structure immediately. You do not spiral into shame or justification. You acknowledge the breach, identify the cause, and re-enter the protocol without delay. The standard remains intact. The response is disciplined, not emotional. This method strengthens identity faster than perfectionism. The goal is not flawless execution. The goal is unbroken commitment to return to alignment each time deviation occurs. When accountability replaces self-criticism, discipline becomes sustainable. You refine your behavior instead of abandoning it. Winter training advances into deeper psychological territory. The system must become instinct. Routine must become reflex. Identity must merge with structure. You no longer perform discipline, you embody it. A philosophical inner citadel approach builds sovereignty through understanding, not force. You are not only training behavior, you are training authorship over your inner world. The Stoics taught that a person becomes unshakable when their ruling principle is disciplined and ordered. This winter arc develops that principle. External conditions lose influence when internal structure is stable. The mind becomes fortified by clarity. You know what you stand on, you know what governs you, you know what you will tolerate from yourself and what you will not. This is how the citadel forms. It is not isolation from life. It is insulation from disorder. The inner world becomes governed by reasoned command instead of emotional drift. The more you live in alignment with your standard, the quieter the internal world becomes. There is less noise because there is no argument. You are not debating action. You are carrying it out. This silence is strength. It means the self has become unified instead of divided. A divided self leaks energy. A unified self directs it. The winter arc deepens this unity through repetition without interruption. Each completed day reinforces the wall. Each disciplined choice becomes stone. The citadel is built action by action. Nothing dramatic, nothing explosive. Just correct action carried through consistency until strength becomes nature. This is the pivotal shift most people never reach. They treat discipline as an effort that must be constantly regenerated. In a winter arc, discipline becomes identity. It is no longer something you try to maintain. It is something that remains because it is part of your operating system. When identity and behavior match, effort drops while results rise. Shift from internal fortification into strategic dominance. Hold the line across long stretches of winter, maintain pace when the environment grows harsher, and convert the season into compounding advantage that carries forward into spring without loss of momentum. With command presence as the posture, discipline becomes visible through conduct. You are not announcing transformation. You are carrying yourself in a way that reflects it. The shift is expressed through consistency, pace, clarity, and decisiveness. Other people notice a difference without explanation because authority begins showing in your movement, your self-control, and your refusal to drift. Command presence is not performance. It is stability. It is the absence of hesitation. It is the quiet conviction of a person who governs themselves. The winter arc transitions from internal construction into external atmosphere. You do not force influence. You radiate it through reliability and restraint. The strategic dominance phase is where most people abandon their efforts, because this is where the novelty fades and only discipline remains. This is the terrain a Stoic trains for. You do not require stimulation to continue. You continue because continuation is the standard. When others slow down, you maintain pace. When they retreat into comfort, you reinforce order. Here is how to hold this posture through long winter cycles, how to anchor identity deeper with repetition, and how to convert consistency into unshakable presence. With progressive overload as the governing pace, the winter arc increases demand gradually. The standard tightens as discipline strengthens. You are not asked to become unbreakable on day one. You are trained into unbreakability through steady escalation. Capacity increases because responsibility increases in controlled increments. This mirrors how the body grows stronger, under increasing weight. The mind follows the same law. The first month of a winter arc is foundation. You establish rhythm. You eliminate drift. You harden routine into default behavior. You teach the nervous system that discipline is predictable and recurring. Once rhythm is stable, the second month deepens the standard. You increase the volume of focused skill work. You hold longer attention blocks. You remove more digital noise. You sleep with intention instead of collapse. You begin sharpening posture, tone, pace, and energy. The third month becomes consolidation. The goal is no longer improvement. The goal is permanence. By this phase, your body, mind, and schedule recognize discipline as baseline. You no longer negotiate with urgency. You no longer require internal debate. The identity shift has begun to integrate. You are not trying to maintain changes. You are living inside them. Progressive overload also means tightening discipline at the psychological level. You begin removing subtle comforts you once relied on. You close small escape routes. You reduce unnecessary stimulation. You protect silence. You protect deep work. You treat attention like currency. This strengthens the inner citadel because you stop leaking energy into trivial impulses. Command presence becomes more pronounced here. You move differently. Your posture becomes deliberate. Your breathing becomes steady. You walk with intention. You no longer rush, scatter, or drift. This quiet firmness signals sovereignty. People sense discipline in your conduct before they hear it in your words. The gap between you and the average person widens in this phase. Most people slow down during winter. You accelerate internally. Most people collapse into distraction. You refine attention into purpose. You are building the type of mind that can hold a direction without external push. That is rare. That rarity compounds. Holding the line during this phase requires awareness of monotony. Growth during winter is not exciting. It is repetition practiced with conviction. This is the point where impulsive people quit. The Stoic continues. The discipline is not sustained by mood. It is sustained by standard. Consistency becomes the law you live under by choice. Move deeper into identity fusion. Discipline is no longer something you do, but something you are, and the inner citadel turns from shield into command center. Identity fusion begins when discipline no longer feels like something you apply to your life, but something that governs your life from within. You stop thinking about whether you will execute. You simply execute. The mind stops requesting comfort because comfort is no longer the reference point. The reference point becomes alignment with your standard. This is the shift from practice into embodiment. At this stage, the inner citadel is no longer a shelter you retreat into when challenged. It becomes the command center you operate from at all times. You are not escaping the world. You are directing your place within it. Your actions are not reactive, they are intentional. The self is no longer divided. The voice that commands and the part that obeys move in unison. Grounded command expresses itself through stability. You do not rush. You do not scramble. You do not collapse into urgency. You act with deliberate pacing because the inner world is ordered. This creates presence. People sense your discipline before they understand it. They notice the steadiness, the posture, the restraint, the lack of wasted motion. The atmosphere around you shifts because you are operating from clarity instead of impulse. The nervous system adapts to this posture. Stress does not push you out of alignment. Noise does not disrupt your focus. The world loses its leverage over you because your internal state is governed by principle instead of mood. This is the Stoic definition of freedom. You are no longer controlled by reaction. You are controlled by intention. Once this level is reached, negotiation disappears from behavior. You do not bargain with execution. You do not reconsider the standard midway through. You do not evaluate effort while performing it. You complete action because completion is law. You remain loyal to your own commands. This is the highest form of self-respect. A winter arc built to this level turns discipline into identity and identity into presence. The season reshapes how you occupy your own life. You are no longer moving towards strength. You are moving as strength. Sustain this level of embodiment and reinforce the standard until it becomes unquestioned and automatic. Selecting quiet superiority as the external posture means you do not lower your standard to match your environment. You remain disciplined in a world that drifts. You remain ordered in a culture built on impulse. You remain deliberate around people who move without direction. Superiority here is not ego, it is elevation. You operate on a higher code because you have earned it through self-governance. Quiet superiority is a natural consequence of internal mastery. You no longer look sideways for reference. You do not trade discipline for social acceptance. You do not absorb the lax mindset around you. You move with calm certainty because your priorities are not borrowed from the crowd. You no longer need alignment with others to act in alignment with yourself. This posture does not isolate you, it differentiates you. You are not seeking dominance over others. You are standing above the common drift of undisciplined living. When a person governs themselves, they become difficult to influence. Their presence becomes a boundary. The world cannot easily pull them off their path because their standard has become structural. This is where the winter arc creates separation. The longer you live by this standard, the wider the gap becomes between you and people who carry no discipline. You do not have to assert strength. The absence of chaos in your behavior speaks for you. People sense weight behind your presence because you have internal order. Silent superiority is the posture of someone who has built themselves from the inside out. Sustain this posture across the remainder of the winter cycle and into the transition into spring, where your transformation becomes visible, not because you announce it, but because it is unmistakable in your conduct. With unmistakable upgrade as the visibility level, the transformation becomes undeniable. People do not vaguely sense improvement. They experience a sharpened presence that is impossible to miss. The contrast becomes a signal. You move with precision in a culture of disorder. You maintain direction in a world addicted to drift. The difference is no longer subtle. It is definitive. This level of transformation is not expressed through announcement. It is expressed through conduct. The discipline shows in posture, breathing, eye contact, schedule fidelity, and refusal to negotiate with weakness. Others may not understand the source of the change, but they feel the shift in weight. You carry your life differently. You occupy space differently. Winter has remade you into someone who is no longer reachable by old patterns. Sustain and reinforce this state until it becomes permanent architecture. A disciplined winter becomes a decisive spring, and momentum compounds once identity reaches this tier of embodiment. With the final arc tone set to immovable pillar, the transformation you are building toward culminates in permanence rather than climax. The ending represents arrival at a state of internal solidity that does not wobble when conditions change. You are not forging intensity for a moment. You are refining steadiness for a lifetime. An immovable pillar does not surge and collapse. It holds, it endures. It does not need spectacle. It does not need acknowledgement. Its strength is measured by continuity. The disciplined person who completes a winter arc of this design becomes a fixed point in a world of fluctuation. They do not chase momentum, they originate it. Authority becomes the atmosphere you move through. You no longer manage discipline. You carry it. You no longer remind yourself to live by a standard. The standard lives through you. Other people feel the difference before they understand it. Your pace is measured. Your presence is deliberate. There is no excess motion, no scattered attention, no collapse of posture. You move like someone who does not need permission to be in command of themselves. When discipline reaches this level, it stops being a practice and becomes a frame of living. You are governed by internal law. You do not negotiate with urges because urges are irrelevant to the identity you stand on. You do not return to former habits because the person capable of sustaining them no longer exists. Your relationship with yourself becomes governed by authority instead of impulse. This is the psychological altitude that winter is designed to build. Most people assume growth comes from intensity. Real growth comes from continuity. The repeated act of honoring your own command builds a weight inside your character. That weight becomes presence. People sense structure without you speaking about it. They sense clarity because your life is not fragmented. Authority expressed inwardly becomes command expressed outwardly, not domination, not performance. Authority. A person who governs themselves influences their environment without intention to influence. Their steadiness becomes gravity. Their consistency becomes signal. Their restraint becomes proof. There is no need to convince anyone of anything. The evidence is visible in their conduct. At this stage, winter discipline is no longer about building strength. It is about protecting it. You no longer fight for alignment. You maintain alignment. Your energy is not wasted managing yourself, which means it can be directed toward creation, strategy, and higher forms of execution. The nervous system is trained to operate under order. This gives you psychological leverage that average living cannot produce. The world reacts to people who have command over themselves. Most individuals are governed by distraction, emotion, convenience, and stimulus. They see someone who is not moved by any of those forces, and it creates contrast. This contrast is the beginning of quiet authority. The disciplined person becomes a reference point, not because they demand respect, but because they embody it. As winter deepens, your identity stabilizes into a mode of operation that does not require force. You have removed negotiation. You have removed internal contradiction. You have removed the gap between intention and execution. What remains is a unified self. A unified self radiates control the way a flame radiates heat, automatically, continuously, by nature of what it is. Stoic expansion means the discipline you have built is now converted into forward pressure. You do not simply hold the standard. You move through the world with it. The energy no longer turns inward for reinforcement. It moves outward as direction. Your choices become decisive instead of tentative. Your actions carry weight because they originate from a unified self instead of a conflicted one. This is where winter training begins generating visible outcomes, not through display, but through trajectory. You begin advancing instead of preserving. The nervous system is no longer occupied with resisting old habits. It is free to build. It is free to create. It is free to apply force toward goals that once felt distant or theoretical. Most people live at the mercy of their state. They act when they feel ready. They move when conditions are ideal. The disciplined individual moves independent of mood. Movement becomes a principle. You have trained yourself to act before hesitation forms. This is where authority becomes momentum. You no longer prepare to live differently. You are living differently. Your calendar reflects seriousness. Your routine reflects priority. Your body reflects discipline. Your tone reflects composure. The change is no longer internal theory. It is observable structure. Action executed from discipline feels different than action executed from motivation. Motivation spikes and collapses. Discipline sustains direction without emotional fuel. Expansion begins when your actions compound without fluctuation. This is how momentum becomes identity rather than a temporary burst. Winter is the perfect training ground for expansion because there is little external interference. No competition for your time, no noise drowning out intention. The world slows down and your rate of internal strengthening accelerates. You are not trying to keep up, you are building ahead. Once expansion begins, you stop chasing outcomes and start shaping them. The person you have become is no longer preparing for a better future. They are architecting it in real time. You move through tasks with assertive presence. You make decisions without retreat into hesitation. You choose long-term strength over short-term stimulation by instinct, not struggle. Relentless forward motion means there is no pause between intention and execution. You carry momentum as a way of living. You do not wait to feel ready. You move, and readiness follows movement. Your life begins to operate on a forward tilt, leaning into advancement, leaning into growth, leaning into responsibility. The system you built in the early stages of winter now becomes fuel for acceleration. This is where most people fall away without realizing it. They think discipline ends once the habit is formed. In a winter arc configured for mastery, discipline evolves into drive. You advance even when there is no visible reward. You push when the environment is still. You act during the season everyone else labels as dormant. By the time they begin in March, you are already sharpened, conditioned, and positioned ahead. Relentless forward motion is not frenzy. It is sustained direction. It is consistent pressure applied day after day until progress becomes inevitable. You do not speed up for bursts. You do not collapse when boredom arrives. You hold the line through sameness, and improvement compounds quietly behind the scenes. This state is rare because it requires a person to live without internal permission slips. You do not wait for certainty. You do not stall for motivation. You build by moving. Action becomes identity because you have removed the gap between knowing and doing. The moment a decision is made, it is acted on. The moment a priority is identified, it is executed. Winter gives you the perfect environment for this because there is no noise to dilute your movement. The world is slower. You are faster. The world is numbed by comfort. You are sharpened by chosen hardship. The world delays. You advance. Forward motion also shifts how you interpret resistance. It stops being a barrier and becomes confirmation. Pressure becomes proof that you are pushing into territory that soft living never reaches. You stop fearing friction. You use it as fuel. When this orientation takes hold, you do not ask whether you will become the version of yourself you envisioned at the start of winter. You are actively becoming that person in real time. Identity and direction merge. Motion and purpose become the same act. Silent distance becomes the natural byproduct of disciplined momentum. You do not push people away. The gap appears on its own. As you continue forward with consistency, others remain still. Progress creates separation without confrontation. You rise by movement while they remain anchored by habit. The distance is not chosen socially. It is created structurally. You stop matching the pace of those who live without order. You no longer adjust downward to stay relatable. You do not dilute your standard to maintain familiarity. Growth creates altitude. People who are unwilling to rise cannot follow you there. The separation is not emotional. It is developmental. This distance is quiet. There is no argument. There is no announcement. There is no fallout. There is simply divergence. You continue upward, They remain where they have always been. You stop orbiting the same conversations, the same distractions, the same cycles. Your life begins to operate on a frequency that those without discipline cannot access. This is why Stoic strength appears detached to the untrained. It is not detachment from people, it is detachment from drift. When you refuse to slow your pace, those who remain idle interpret the separation as withdrawal. In reality, you have simply stopped traveling in circles. You outgrow environments, not out of arrogance but out of alignment. When your actions are consistent with a higher standard, your life no longer fits inside lower patterns. The winter arc hardens this shift because the isolation of the season magnifies difference. The more you evolve internally, the less space there is for the habits and environments that once held you. Silent distance protects momentum. You do not need to defend your pace. You do not need to justify your discipline. You advance and the world reorganizes around the new trajectory. Those who value growth will follow. Those who prefer comfort will fade. Either outcome requires no reaction from you. Impersonal release means you do not carry anyone with you who is unwilling to rise. There is no emotional negotiation. There is no attempt to be understood. You do not pause your ascent to see who is comfortable with your transformation. You continue forward and allow absence to sort itself. You do not chase. You do not explain. You do not slow down to reassure anyone that your evolution is justified. Growth is its own justification. Distance is its own filter. You do not correct those who misunderstand the change. Their interpretation is irrelevant to your trajectory. This posture protects energy. Explanations drain momentum. Reassurance dilutes conviction. When you release without commentary, you preserve direction. People either adapt to the altitude you are moving toward, or they remain behind. Both outcomes cost you nothing. Impersonal release is not harshness, it is clarity. You recognize that not everyone is meant to accompany every version of you. Some people are only aligned with the version of you that tolerated drift. When drift ends, the association dissolves on its own. No closure is required because there is nothing to close, only distance to honor. As you continue through winter with relentless forward motion, your circle shrinks while your standard rises. The noise fades while your focus sharpens. Your environment begins to match your discipline, because anything that cannot match it cannot remain near it. Higher standards fill the space that detachment creates. When old patterns fall away, there is no vacuum. The standard expands to occupy the territory that was once filled by distraction, compromise, and low discipline association. The person you are becoming begins to require more from you than the person you left behind. You no longer measure yourself by effort. You measure yourself by execution. You no longer evaluate your day by intention. You evaluate it by completion. The bar rises because you have outgrown the version of yourself that needed slack. Slack is replaced by precision. Drift is replaced by structure. Hope is replaced by proof. Higher standards also change what counts as acceptable. Behaviors that once felt normal now feel out of alignment. Environments that once felt comfortable now feel restrictive. Decisions that once felt harmless now register as costs. Growth sharpens perception. You see where your energy leaks. You see where your momentum thins. Standards become guardians. This is how permanence is built. Not through a single breakthrough, but through gradual tightening of what you will and will not allow from yourself. As winter progresses, the standard becomes less negotiable. Rules turn into identity. Expectations turn into instinct. You begin holding yourself to a level that no one else can enforce because no one else set it. Higher standards remove the need for external accountability. You rise because you refuse to descend. You advance because you refuse stagnation. You protect momentum by refusing softness. The standard becomes the structure that holds your life in alignment without supervision. Higher mission forms when discipline begins pointing beyond the self. Once identity is stable and internal authority is secured, direction becomes the next demand. You no longer wake up only to maintain order. You wake up to advance a purpose. The energy that once went into stabilizing the self now becomes available for construction of something larger than personal optimization. Mission does not arrive through inspiration. It reveals itself through capability. When you build enough self-mastery, a new category of responsibility becomes visible. You begin asking different questions, not, "How do I improve myself?" but, "What am I building with the strength I have developed?" Discipline matures into purpose when growth stops being about avoidance of weakness and begins being about the creation of impact. Winter creates the ideal environment for mission emergence because silence removes interference. You hear what actually drives you when the noise is gone. Clarity rises when stimulation decreases. Most people cannot find purpose because they cannot hear themselves beneath distraction. When winter strips away the excess, mission becomes audible. A higher mission does not feel like ambition. It feels like inevitability. It is not something you chase. It is something you grow into. You become the kind of person who can carry a larger responsibility, and the larger responsibility begins to seek you. Purpose does not land on a mind that is still fighting for control of itself. It lands on a mind that has already been claimed. This is the inflection point of a winter arc. You are no longer building just to strengthen the self. You are building to wield the self. Identity becomes instrument. Discipline becomes fuel. Consistency becomes direction. The work you are doing on yourself is no longer about self-maintenance. It is preparation for mission. Mastery becomes the natural direction of a higher mission because strength seeks refinement once stability has been secured. When discipline is no longer used to correct weakness, it is free to sharpen potential. You begin pursuing depth instead of repair. The goal shifts from becoming functional to becoming formidable. Mastery is not intensity, it is exactness. It is the relentless pursuit of higher command over the self, the craft, the mind, and the standard you live under. You stop asking for progress and begin demanding precision from yourself. The bar rises not because of pressure from the outside world, but because you now require more from your own execution. A person who reaches this stage no longer measures progress by comparison. Growth is measured by improvement against their previous peak. You stop competing with others entirely. You compete only with the next level of refinement available to you. The reference point becomes your future self, not your surroundings. This is the threshold where routine turns into discipline and discipline turns into craft. You are no longer performing habits. You are sculpting identity. You are not maintaining order. You are weaponizing it. You develop an instinct for precision because anything less feels like regression. Mastery also forces you to think in terms of trajectory instead of mood. You begin making decisions that compound across years, not days. You value boredom because repetition is the forge. You value austerity because minimalism protects concentration. You value stillness because stillness sharpens perception. You value pressure because pressure verifies strength. In this phase of the winter arc, every action becomes an expression of standard. Every choice becomes a demonstration of alignment. Every repetition becomes reinforcement. Mastery is not a talent you uncover. It is a threshold you cross when you refuse to descend from the standard you have built. Mastery of the mind becomes the governing force behind every action that follows. Once discipline has solidified identity, the next evolution is precision of thought. A strong body can endure pressure, but a strong mind directs it. Mental mastery is the power to choose focus, govern interpretation, and control internal narrative without drift. Most people are ruled by unexamined thought patterns. They react to whatever the mind produces as if every impulse deserves attention. A winter-forged mind does not operate this way. Thought is filtered before it reaches belief. Impulse is evaluated before it becomes action. Attention becomes a strategic resource, not an involuntary leak. You begin noticing the structure of your thinking instead of just the content. You track how a thought enters, how it pulls energy, and whether it deserves continuation. When the mind is mastered, not every idea becomes a direction, and not every emotion becomes a truth. You gain control of interpretation, which is the highest form of psychological strength. Mental mastery also sharpens discernment. You stop consuming information passively. You study with intention. You read to strengthen judgment instead of to escape discomfort. You learn to extract principles rather than chase stimulation. The mind becomes a forge instead of a sponge. As mastery deepens, your thinking becomes quieter and more exact. There is no internal argument. There is no debate with yourself. There is only recognition and command. You do not ask the mind to align. You direct it. You do not hope for clarity. You create it by governing attention. Strategic precision is the moment when thought begins shaping action with exactness. Instead of reacting to circumstances, you select outcomes. Instead of scattering attention, you direct it like a blade. The mind no longer generates movement. It governs movement. You act only where the return is meaningful, and you withhold effort where the outcome does not serve the mission. This is a higher tier of mastery because it removes waste. You stop solving problems that do not deserve your energy. You stop entertaining people who drain momentum. You stop entering battles that do not advance your position. Precision is not speed, it is selectivity. You conserve strength by applying it only where it builds advantage. Your thinking becomes structured around consequence. You see actions not as isolated events, but as trajectory. Small decisions are no longer small. Each one either strengthens the arc or weakens it. This produces a form of discipline that feels like inevitability. Your direction is too defined to be disrupted by impulse. Strategic precision also sharpens focus on leverage. You learn to identify what moves the needle and what merely feels productive. Most people drown in activity that produces no compounding outcome. A disciplined mind filters noise from signal. You begin choosing effort based on impact, not on habit. At this level of winter training, you do not chase momentum. You engineer it by eliminating everything that fractures attention. The fewer directions you move in, the faster you accelerate in the one that matters. Precision is the conversion of mastery into force. Precision turned inward becomes refinement. You begin tightening the fine details of your conduct, not because anything is broken, but because excellence demands sharpness. Discipline handled the broad strokes. Precision now handles the edges. You inspect the micro habits that shape your internal state. You refine posture, tone, pacing, reaction speed, and mental entry points. Nothing is left accidental. This refinement is subtle but powerful. You notice when your speech wanders instead of landing cleanly. You notice when your attention dulls by even a few degrees. You notice when your breathing shifts from control to reaction. These small calibrations separate the merely disciplined from the truly forged. Your schedule becomes tighter. Your transitions between actions become cleaner. You do not drift between tasks. You transfer between them with intention. Idle moments stop existing because idleness is replaced by presence. Even rest becomes structured rather than escapist. Refinement also affects emotional bandwidth. You begin treating emotional spikes as data rather than disruption. You observe before responding. You redirect instead of absorb. The nervous system becomes an instrument under command rather than a channel of reflex. Calm stops being a state you reach. It becomes the baseline you regulate from. This stage of mastery creates a psychological silence that most people never experience. A state where nothing inside you pulls against your direction. You are not trying to become aligned. You are aligned, and refinement protects that alignment from erosion. An untouchable standard forms once refinement settles into identity. You are no longer maintaining discipline. You are operating from a level that does not slip. What once required effort is now non-negotiable. The floor of your behavior rises so high that your former ceiling becomes the baseline you begin from. This is the point where the possibility of regression disappears. There is nothing to return to because the former version of you no longer exists as a reference. The habits that shaped that identity have been dismantled. The mental patterns that sustained it have been severed. The only direction available is forward. An untouchable standard turns discipline into inevitability. You do not wonder whether you will execute. You live in a state where execution is assumed. The mind does not negotiate because there is nothing left to debate. The identity is already decided. The behavior simply follows its architecture. This level of transformation is rare because it requires a person to become incompatible with their former life. Not by emotional force, but by internal elevation. You are no longer holding a standard. You are the standard. Anything beneath it cannot attach to you because there is nowhere for it to land. Permanence begins here. Winter stops being a challenge and becomes a proving ground you have already mastered. What remains is expansion, not restoration. Environmental control begins once the internal standard becomes immovable. The world around you starts to reorganize itself in response to your consistency. You do not force change into your surroundings. Your presence makes disorder incompatible. Anything that disrupts rhythm is removed by the gravity of your standard. Structure expands outward because instability cannot survive near permanence. Your environment stops being a place you live inside and becomes a field you govern. The objects you keep, the noise you allow, the routines you tolerate, the people you permit access to your attention, all of it begins to reflect the discipline you have become. The room becomes sharper because the mind inhabiting it is sharp. Order is not maintenance, it is atmosphere. You stop bending to the environment because the environment now bends to you. The space you occupy becomes a physical extension of your internal command system. There is no clutter because your mind is not cluttered. There is no chaos because your standard does not allow it. You are not relying on your surroundings to motivate you. Your surroundings are calibrated to sustain your direction. This shift creates a form of sovereignty most people never experience. They adapt to their environment. You reshape yours. The moment a standard becomes internal law, the external world adjusts to match it. The environment begins reflecting your discipline instead of diluting it. Environmental control becomes leverage. Once the space around you reflects discipline, it begins supplying momentum instead of draining it. The environment stops being neutral and becomes a multiplier. Every object is placed for purpose. Every habit is anchored by design. Every corner reinforces readiness. The space itself pushes you forward. This is when forward motion accelerates without strain. You are no longer climbing against friction. The world you operate inside now reinforces your direction. Instead of requiring energy to begin, your surroundings cue movement automatically. Momentum becomes a byproduct of architecture. Your environment now acts as a partner in discipline. It reminds you of your mission before you even think about it. It removes delay by eliminating friction. It feeds clarity by minimizing noise. You move with speed because nothing competes against your standard anymore. This phase transforms discipline from internal effort into external propulsion. You no longer rely on willpower, you rely on alignment. The space is built to keep you in motion, so motion becomes the path of least resistance. Inevitable ascension begins when your standard no longer keeps you stable, it pulls you upward. You do not chase elevation. Elevation moves toward you because your internal structure makes you incompatible with lower tiers of living. The world begins reorganizing around your discipline the way a river reorganizes around stone. Position shifts without announcement. Access increases without negotiation. You are not promoted by opportunity. You are promoted by gravity. Your conduct carries a weight that forces recalibration in every space you enter. People do not treat you differently because you asked. They treat you differently because your presence signals authority before you speak. Ascension is not a reward. It is the consequence of internal law. When a person becomes immovable internally, their trajectory becomes directional externally. The world does not decide whether you rise. The rise is already embedded in the way you live. You do not depend on recognition. Recognition becomes a trailing indicator of the position you have already assumed inwardly. This is the stage where life starts moving out of your way. Rooms that once felt out of reach begin to open because you now match the discipline required to stand in them. Environments that once resisted you now align with you because you operate at a level that demands adaptation. You are no longer trying to gain entry. You are becoming the threshold. Ascension at this level is not loud, it is structural. You are not carried upward by applause. You ascend because you do not collapse. You are not lifted by others. You rise because nothing in you bends downward anymore. Becoming the one who builds forward means your rise is not the conclusion, it is the foundation. Ascension is not where the arc ends, it is where authorship begins. Once you no longer fight for self-command, your energy is freed to shape direction. You stop living inside conditions and begin designing them. You are not occupying a higher position, you are constructing one. This is the transition from elevation to authorship. You are no longer defined by the environment you hardened yourself within. You are now shaping the terrain ahead. The question is no longer, how do I rise? The question becomes, what am I building from this altitude? Winter does not end with transformation. It ends with trajectory. You carry forward as a force that engineers the next stage rather than waits for it. The purpose of winter discipline is not survival, it is dominion, the power to choose direction and impose form on the season that follows. The evolution is complete when you no longer adapt to circumstance, but make circumstance answer to you. Strategic force is the form dominion takes when mastery turns outward into shaping. You are no longer moving through life as a participant. You are moving through it as the one who sets direction. You do not wait to see what the environment will allow. You decide what the environment will become. Your presence is not reactive. It is directive. This is dominion through design. You act as the architect of outcomes rather than the recipient of conditions. You are not adjusting to circumstance. You are structuring circumstance. Your decisions create gravity. Your standard becomes the blueprint that reality bends around. Strategic force is quiet, but absolute. You are not pushing against resistance. You are structuring pathways that remove it. You are not fighting obstacles. You are designing routes that render them irrelevant. You have moved beyond endurance. You have entered authorship. This is the psychological point where winter mastery shifts into world-shaping posture. You no longer wonder what the next season will bring. You decide what the next season will be required to hold. Movement is no longer about self-betterment. It is about directionality. You have become the one who builds forward. Unbreakable identity is the final state of a winter arc. The work does not dissolve when the season ends, because the self that required reinforcement no longer exists. There is no return to former patterns, because there is no former structure to return to. The foundation has been replaced. The identity has been rewritten. The old architecture is gone. This is permanence in its purest form. Discipline is not something you maintain. It is the person you are. Strength is not something you access. It is the posture you live from. Direction is not something you seek. It is embedded in how you move. Nothing is borrowed. Nothing is conditional. Nothing depends on momentum. The identity holds by itself. Winter has done its work. The season did not change you temporarily. It revealed the version of you that was always possible but never enforced. You do not leave winter as a stronger person trying to preserve progress. You leave it as a different person for whom progress is the default state. This is the seal. There is no undoing what you have become. The world may shift. Conditions may change. Circumstances may test. But identity remains fixed. The arc is complete not because it ends here, but because there is no version of you that can fall below this line again. You do not emerge from winter hopeful. You emerge confirmed. The identity is set. The direction is set. The standard is permanent. You no longer prepare to become. You are. The season did not elevate you temporarily. It established your final baseline. From this point forward, there is no return, only continuation of the force you have already become.